About 3 years ago, I built an ultimate air compressor for my garage. I put it through its paces for about a year and a half before I even thought about doing a video on this build. It was definitely one of the biggest and the best upgrades that I've done for my garage, and it works amazingly well to this day. After I posted this video, it became by far the best performing video on my whole channel. That amounted to almost 3 million views and 41,000 likes, with over 98% of like to dislike ratio. I say that's pretty good. And there were over 4,700 comments, many of which were questions. So in today's episode, I'm going to cover most of the common questions I got. When I was looking for a 60-gallon compressor tank to start my air compressor build, I ended up getting 2 tanks for the price of 1. A bunch of people commented saying that I should have kept that second tank and turned it into an expansion tank to double the volume of air of my air compressor setup. I actually commented on that and left my comment pinned at the very top of the comment section. That's where I explained that I personally did not see the need for that because this new pump outpumps the demand at which I'm using up the air. So if I'm continuously painting where I have the trigger of the paint gun depressed all the way down and I'm just going to town painting some car panels, as the air inside of the tank drops to 100 psi, the pressure switch will trigger the compressor to turn on and it will pump up the pressure to 130 psi and it will shut off all while I'm still continuously painting. That means that this air pump can easily outpump the demand at which I'm using up the air. Therefore, there's really no need for a secondary air expansion tank. But some guys are dead set on having a second tank, and you know what? If that's your prerogative, go for it. I ended up using this blue tank for my build. The original air pump went bad and it ended up dumping a bunch of oil into the tank, so it all had to get cleaned out. I devised this makeshift rotisserie out of a couple of hand trucks, so this way I can lay the tank down, fill it up with some degreaser, and take it for a tumble so that degreaser would reach every nook and cranny on the inside of the tank. After which I pressure washed the insides and dumped out the degreaser that was mixed with oil and rust. And that's when I found out that the oil was actually the least of my concerns because there was quite a bit of rust that came out of the tank. I honestly did not feel safe using this tank without pressure testing it first. So I got it all ready and moved it to the very back of my backyard, with my neighbor's dog just on the other side of the fence. I filled the tank to the brim with water, capped it all off. Then I connected my pressure washer wand to the side port on the tank and stepped behind a tree. With just one quick trigger pull, the pressure inside the tank jumped up to 240 psi. This is definitely good enough for me. By now, this tank's been sitting pressurized at 240 for about 10 minutes, and I think it's safe to say that this thing is good to go, so I'll go ahead and release the pressure. And just like that, that tank has passed the test. A lot of you were concerned about me conducting that air tank pressure test behind that tree, particularly because my neighbor's house is so close to the back of my property line and also the safety of neighbor's dog. I might have over-dramatized things just a little bit. You see, the test that I conducted was 100% safe, and the reason being is because I specifically used water for the test. Unlike air, water does not compress. Well, technically it does, but you have to pressurize it at over 30,000 psi in order to compress water just by 1%. Air, on the other hand, is easily compressible and it decompresses very rapidly, and that what makes air extremely dangerous. In case that tank did not pass the test, the worst thing that would have happened would be the tank would split and all that water would come gushing out. No loud explosion, nothing dramatic. At the very most, the tank would just topple over and that's it. So the main reason why I conducted that test in the back of my backyard is simply because I did not want to dump 60 gallons of water up by my house or even in the middle of my backyard. So that means that I was safe, my neighbor's dog was safe, and their house was 100% safe. Hands down, the best feature of this entire build is this water-based air pre-cooler. I figured that it would make some sort of a difference, but I had no idea just how big of a difference this pre-cooler was going to make. The air being compressed inside of the air pump gets very hot, like over 200 degrees hot, and if you send that hot air straight into the tank, as it cools inside of a cold tank, it will turn into water. You will see that water coming out of your airline, and it will also rust the inside of your tank. So instead of sending that hot air straight into the tank, I first run it through a cooling coil that's submerged in the water inside of this bucket. So by the time the air enters the tank, it's almost same temperature as the tank itself. Therefore, no condensation takes place in there. That means that the air that's going to be coming out of the tank is already going to be dry. In the last video, when I did my temperature test to show the difference in the air temperature on the way down to the cooling coil, and then I measured the temperature of the tube on the way out of the coil, that has already chilled air running through it. And the difference in temperature between two tubes was just over 150 degrees. Next, I compared the temperature of the tube on the cool side to the temperature of the tank, and the difference was only 8 degrees. But what I should have done is I should have taken my temperature reading right over here on the way out, because the air is still cooling as it goes through this air-water separator and also as it travels through this tube on the way to the check valve. So let's quickly repeat the test and see if the result will be any different. The highest temperature that I saw on the way out of the pump was 214 degrees. And the temperature of the tubing just before it enters the tank is 86 degrees, which is exactly the same temperature as the tank itself. The temperature was actually exactly the same, therefore there is zero condensation taking place inside of the tank. By far, the one thing that I got the most questions about is on the operation of the automatic release pressure valve at the bottom of the coil inside of this bucket. That automatic valve was originally designed to be placed at the bottom of the air compressor tank, so this way, every time that the air compressor cycles, that valve would open up for just a little bit and would bleed off any of the water that would collect at the very bottom of the tank. And I just went ahead and repurposed it from the bottom of the tank to the bottom of the cooling coil inside of the water bucket. But how does that valve get activated? So anytime the compressor runs and it reaches its maximum pressure, which in my case is right around 130 psi, as the air pump is compressing the air, it forces the air down this tube, through the coil into the bucket, and it comes right back up, goes into this air-water separator. On the way out of the separator, it goes into the tank through this check valve. The job of the check valve is to allow the air to only pass one way. So think of it as a spring-loaded door that can only be opened one way when you push it. And in this case, pressurized air is pushing that door open, and then once the air stops flowing and there's no more pressure on that door, it closes back up and seals itself shut. So this way, it will not allow the air to escape the pressurized tank to travel back through the tubing and back into the air pump. The original check valve on this tank used to reside at the very top, but since I got things replumbed the way I wanted to, I moved the check valve down to the side of the tank, so once the pump stops pumping and check valve closes, all of these air lines between the check valve and the air pump are still pressurized. The way this particular pressure switch is set up, once the pressure inside of the tank reaches 130 psi, it will cut the power to the electrical motor. And then as air being used and the pressure inside the tank drops to 100 psi, that's when the pressure switch will kick the power back onto the motor, and it will keep supplying the power until the pressure will once again reach 130 psi. But if these airlines are still pressurized, that electrical motor will have one hell of a time trying to spin this pump just to get it going from the dead stop. And that's why when air pump stops pumping, pressure switch will sense that through this vacuum line that runs down to the check valve, and it will automatically bleed off that pressure through a little orifice that's located back here. That automatic pressure release valve at the bottom of the coil also has a trigger vacuum line that comes out of it, and that line is tied directly into the vacuum line that runs to the pressure switch, and it works the same way at the bottom of the coil as this pressure bleed off switch works at the top of the tank. Once the pump stops pumping, it needs to discharge the pressurized system. So it will hiss there for a while, and right at the very end of that hiss, the valve at the bottom of the bucket will open up and bleed off the excess pressure. And any water that's collected at the bottom of the coil will get expelled. all of the other automatic pressure release valves that I found have some sort of an electronic timer built into them. And I'm sure that would work great at the bottom of the air tank, but they definitely would not work at the bottom of the water bucket. And this is the only mechanical valve that I've been able to find that runs off of a pressure/vacuum line that you can actually submerge in the water and it would work. I'm going to leave a link to this valve in the video description down below. Water cooling or air cooling? What's more efficient? Some people have put a copper tubing grid on the wall that relies on an ambient temperature of the air that surrounds the tubing to draw away the heat. In this case, the bigger the grid, the more efficient it is, and since copper isn't cheap, this type of a system can get very expensive very fast. And it's still not very efficient. Other people would coil up the cooling tubing and set it on the back side of the big pulley. And since a large pulley has these fan blades, it will direct and push the air just like your house fan would. Will that help to draw the heat away from that copper tubing? Yes, it would. Would it do it as efficiently as water? No, it wouldn't. And on top of that, this pulley will only run while the compressor is running, and once the compressor recovers and pump stops running, your cooling immediately stops. But inside of a bucket, that coil is continuously being cooled down. Others added fans to help with the heat dissipation, but I chose a different approach. In this test, I'm pretty sure we're going to be dealing with higher temperatures than that air compressor pump could ever put out, but the idea is still the same, so let's do it. I got the thermometer roughly aimed at that black spot on our test panel, and as part of this test, I was trying to get this metal panel as hot as possible by laying down a few beads with my MIG welder to see how long would it take to bring the temperature of that panel back down to 73 degrees. But as I found out later in this test, I should have been welding a bit closer to that black dot, just so I could get those temperatures up a bit higher. 7 minutes and 15 seconds is how long it roughly took for this panel to cool down all on its own from 258 degrees down to 73. Then I repeated the test, and this time around I was able to get my temperatures up almost 100 degrees higher. And once I started the timer, I set up a fan to the left of the test panel, and with it going on full blast, I wanted to see just how much quicker this panel would cool down with that bit of help. That moving air was able to move the heat away from the panel a lot more efficiently, and in the end was able to cool this panel down that was already almost 100 degrees hotter than the previous test, and it did that in 3 minutes and 5 seconds, which is less than half the time of the previous test. During test number 3, I more than doubled the temperatures of test number 2 by pushing them all the way up to 780 degrees. It's no secret that water quenching will cool the metal down extremely fast. But just how fast? Well, that's what we're here to find out. I pulled the test panel out of the water at a 15-second mark, and it was still roughly at 96 degrees. So I dunked it back in for another 10 to 15 seconds, and right at a 30-second mark, we were at our target temperature of 73 degrees. Well, results speaks for themselves. Water cooling is just so much faster and more efficient. And speaking of efficiency, my cooling coil is pretty small in size, and yet it works extremely well, and I don't have to run any fans that would drive up my electric bill. And this is exactly why I am sticking with water cooling. And if you are going to run a cooling coil on your air compressor, make sure that the internal diameter of all of the piping that you are running between your air pump and the tank is the same size or larger than the outlet on your air pump. This way you're not restricting an airflow and choking down your pump. And a link to the tubing that I made my cooling coil out of, along with some other components that I used in this build, is going to be in the video description down below. A bunch of people suggested that I should have coated the inside of the tank with some sort of a rust-preventing coating. That's not a bad idea. At first, I did not think about doing that. But afterwards, once I put my compressor through a trial run, in my case, I once again did not see the need for that. Let me explain. The main reason you would want to coat the inside of your tank is to prevent it from rusting. But with my water pre-cooling setup, the air that enters the tank has already been cooled down, so there's not any condensation that's taking place inside. With moisture not entering the tank, I don't really have to worry about anything rusting on the inside. Every now and again, I will open up the valve at the bottom of the tank just to see if anything would come out, and the only thing that ever comes out is just dry air, no water whatsoever. So if you guys are not pre-cooling your air, then I would definitely advise getting the inside of your tank coated with something, because that will surely prolong the life of your tank. I've had quite a few people suggest that while I'm running the compressor and as cooling coil is heating up, it will quickly heat up the water inside of the bucket. And in turn, that water will lose its cooling ability. Think about the last time you were in the kitchen cooking something and you had to bring up a pot of water up to a boiling temperature. That doesn't happen very quickly. It takes some time. Considering that if you have a gas stove, natural gas burns at almost 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit and almost 2,000 degrees Celsius. And if you have an electric stove, the temperature output would vary on the brand of the appliances that you're using, and generally on high heat setting, according to Google, the burner temperature goes somewhere between 500 and 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And in this situation, the hottest that I can get this thing up to is around 210 degrees Fahrenheit or about 95 degrees Celsius. Now think about it, if it's a holiday and you got a lot of people coming to your house and you have to cook a lot of food, therefore you're trying to bring up the biggest pot of water that you may have in your possession up to a boiling point, and that really takes a long time. Somehow, I doubt that the biggest pot that you have would be over 2 to 3 gallon capacity, unless you're cooking at some soup kitchen where they got some huge pots. So now think about how long it would take to heat up 5 gallons of water. Well, I tested that multiple times, and let me tell you, it takes a really long time, especially if my tubing only heats up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The fact that my air compressor is set up on a shaded side of the house means that at the hottest point of the day, the bucket and the tank are in the shade, therefore they're not really getting all that warm. But let's face it, most people don't even have their air compressor sitting outside like I do. But at any point, if you're running your compressor really hard for a really long time and you are concerned about your water temperatures going up, you have 3 different options. Option number 1, get yourself a big old 55-gallon plastic drum. I bet you anything you won't be able to heat up that much water. Option number 2, drop a hose into the bucket that's barely trickling out. This way, as bucket overflows, fresh cold water will continuously keep refilling the bucket and it will keep the water temperature at bay. And option number 3, so if you're running your compressor really hard on a really hot day, you don't have a 55-gallon drum, and you don't have a water spigot nearby, or maybe you just don't own a hose to keep the water temperatures down in a bucket, you can always feed the bucket some ice. And you'd probably want to use a bit more ice than I just dumped into the bucket. What about wintertime? What if it's freezing outside? If the water inside the bucket will freeze, that can definitely be an issue. When water freezes, it expands. That can cause your bucket to crack. Or if you have any standing water at the bottom of your coil, that will also freeze and may cause your air line to crack. And even if it doesn't crack, frozen water inside of your line will create a blockage. And at that time, if you turn on your compressor, you will surely ruin your air pump. So what can you do to make sure that that doesn't happen? Well, a sure way to keep the water in the bucket from freezing is to use some good old antifreeze. Mix it 50-50, half a bucket of antifreeze and the other half a bucket of just plain old tap water. And that would also prevent any kind of algae or even mosquitoes reproducing inside of the water bucket. It's a good idea to keep a lid on the bucket. This way it keeps the bugs and dirt out. Also, it slows down the evaporation of water big time, and this is definitely something you want to have on your bucket if you are running an antifreeze mix, because all types of animals will try to get in there and drink it, and that will definitely unalive them. This new pump is much quieter than my old one. Number 1 reason I absolutely hated this compressor is because how insanely loud it is. If this thing was running and I walked about a block away from my house, I kid you not, I can hear it running all the way from there. I had to turn the volume on this next part way down. My Apple Watch has a decibel meter. Not sure how accurate this test is going to be, but let's give it a shot. I'm going to set the watch roughly 2 feet away from the air pump. First, let's gauge and see how loud my quiet backyard is. With me not speaking, the ambient noise level stays right around 42 to 43 decibels. Not sure if you guys can hear it, but the watch is even picking up the birds in the background, which drives up the noise level by a couple of decibels. And let's see what happens with the compressor running. And now let's fire up my old compressor. There you have it, 81 decibels compared to 94. 13 decibel difference may not sound like much, but the difference between peace and quiet of my backyard, which comes in at about 42 decibels, compared to standing just 2 feet away from the running compressor, is 40 decibels. So that would make this compressor about 1/3 louder than this one. And let me tell you, it's a sizable difference. I can actually have a conversation while standing next to this compressor, and there's no way I can do the same while standing next to this one. Many of you suggested that I should keep this compressor out of the elements. Well, my old compressor sat in the same exact spot for 10 years, and it only went out due to that internal failure. As you can tell, there's actually a roof above the compressor, so this thing doesn't really get wet unless it rains sideways, and that doesn't happen very often. There's one thing that I did not put into consideration when I put together this cooling coil, and it's called galvanic corrosion. So let me quickly show you what it is, and let's fix it. I specifically made provisions for this sort of thing in the form of quick disconnect of this vacuum line and also 2 union connectors that makes the removal of the cooling coil fast and easy for any sort of service that this coil may require, just as it did this time around. I sure did not foresee this aluminum cage crumbling away. Oh wow, just take a look at that. Our cooling coil is made of copper, and a little frame to keep it all together I made out of aluminum. Frame totally just fell apart. This is pretty wild. The copper is actually fine. The copper itself did not corrode. It's the aluminum frame that corroded away. So in order to avoid this sort of a corrosion scenario, instead of using aluminum to make that frame, I should have used copper. Or at the very least, there should have been some sort of a non-metallic spacer between the two metals to prevent them from touching. As I was taking it all apart, this cage literally crumbled away. Galvanic corrosion occurs when different types of metals come together, especially in a damp or wet environment. This time, to solidify the cooling coil, instead of using any sort of metal, I'll just use a good old plastic rod. Plastic is non-corrosive and it is sturdy enough to do the job. So if we look at the design of the cooling coil, this is going to be our hot side. It comes down here and then it turns into a coil and it keeps going down, 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 all the way down. And all the way at the very bottom of the coil, I got this copper T that drops down into an elbow. And even if you look at the elbow, I got the automatic drain valve still pointing down. So this way, as water condenses within the coil, it will drop down to the lowest point possible. And then once the valve opens up, the water will get expelled out of this orifice. On the other side of the T, we got that runner up that goes straight out. The cooled air will come out this cold side and it will continue on into another air-water separator that will pick up anything that did not settle down at the bottom of the cooling coil, and only then cool air will get plumbed into the tank. So, how much did I spend on this entire setup? As some of you would remember from the previous video, I acquired this tank along with a second tank altogether for $100. I kept this tank and I ended up selling the other tank for $100, so in the end, this tank was free to me. So the things that I had to buy were the air pump, the 2-groove pulley that went onto the electric motor, along with the 2 belts. Then I got all of this copper tubing, along with the automatic drain valve, air-water separator, and I had to get this check valve. So with the tank being free, I spent roughly around $400 on the rest of the components to get my new air compressor going just as you see it right now. The only failure that I had on this entire system in the last 3 years was this power pressure switch. And that's just one of those things. It did not fail because of something I did wrong. These things just do fail from time to time, and that's why you can find these things in abundance online, because they do fail quite often. By the way, if you ever want to tweak the pressures at which your compressor kicks on and also shuts off, like in my case, the setting for shut off is at 130 psi, and compressor will kick back on once the pressure drops down to 100 psi. You can adjust this screw right here by turning it in and out, and that will change your compressor kick on and off points. I also want to quickly go over the use of correct oil inside of the pump. These pumps specifically call for the use of non-detergent oil. Let me explain why. Detergents are designed to keep the contaminants suspended in the oil so that they can get filtered out. But in an engine such as this one that does not have a filtration system, you want those particles to drop out of the suspension to the very bottom and stay there. And that is exactly what the non-detergent oil is designed to do. And if you look here, the drain plug is located on the very bottom. So once you back it out, all of the oil with all of the contaminants that have settled down on the bottom will flow out along with the used oil. Another thing to keep in mind is foaming, and non-detergent oils will not foam up. Despite what a lot of people said about the use of a flexible copper line not being rated to a high pressure that this air pump puts out, I personally did not see an issue with it, and I have not had a single air leak anywhere within either one of these two flexible lines. Also, quite a few people commented on my not so stellar pipe soldering skills. To that I'll say, guys, this was my very first attempt at soldering piping ever. And once again, I have not had a single failure or an air leak anywhere within my air system. Every single one of these solder joints held up like a champ. After 3 years sitting out in the elements, this air hose definitely has some dry rot. It's mainly caused by the direct sunlight exposure. This is what it used to look like. This is the difference between shielded and unshielded parts of the hose. This area is totally intact and crack-free, but right below it, that's where all the cracking begins. And as of late, it actually started leaking air out of here and out of this portion of hose down here. I do have a solution for this, but first we have to remove everything that's related to the old hose and then make provisions for our new setup. I picked up this retracting reel with 50 feet of hose off of Facebook Marketplace for 20 bucks. This is definitely going to be a nice upgrade. Oh, this is nice. I should have done this a long time ago. Now I gotta protect my new hose so it doesn't end up like the old one. I'm going to borrow the sleeve off of my old hose, so this way it can protect the stick out on my new hose. Now I have a sleeve over this end of the hose, however, this hose right here is still exposed. But this isn't anything complicated and I will address this sometime in the near future. I bought this pump at Harbor Freight and it's been great. I have no complaints about it whatsoever. Sadly, Harbor Freight discontinued this item. Good news is, I think there is a worthy replacement that took its place. This is a single stage pump. The compressed air immediately gets expelled out of the cylinders into the airline. The new pump that Harbor Freight is selling is a two-stage pump. That means that one side of the pump will first compress the air, then send it to the other part of the pump that will compress that air even more, and then that super compressed air will get expelled out. That may even be a better option. I don't have any experience with two-stage pumps, but if you guys are interested, go ahead and leave me a comment down in the comment section and let me know if you want me to do another compressor build with the use of that updated two-stage pump. If I get enough interest, I will definitely do that build, so make sure to let me know. I think I was able to cover all of the common questions, but if I missed something or if you guys have a question about something else, please do let me know in the comment section down below. If I were to do this all over again, would I change anything? And to be perfectly honest with you, the only things that I would change are the things that I addressed in this video, like that aluminum cage around the copper coil and also not leaving this hose exposed to the elements. Other than that, I'm really happy with the way this compressor turned out, and I have no doubt that it will serve me for years to come. But if anything will change in the future, I will surely let you guys know. And with that being said, I'll be seeing you on the next one.